Pilot Officer Slater, were you on manoeuvres with a group when this accident occurred?
Yes, we were on tactical exercises at the time, just east of Newcastle.
How many aircraft were concerned?
8 aircraft at the time.
What were these manoeuvres?
Tactical manoeuvres involving defensive and attacking procedures, which is normal for this type of work that we're doing at the moment.
Does this type of exercise normally carried out over populated areas?
Not normally, no.
What happened in this case?
Well, it apparently it must have been a combination of factors. I wouldn't like to comment on it at the time, but we just happened to drift over Newcastle at the time, and it was just unfortunate this accident occurred.
In your own words, exactly what did happen?
Well, I was in a section of 2. I was following my leader, and he initiated a certain manoeuvre which I intended to follow, but I got into difficulties in it, which turned out to be a spin, and I advised him accordingly. I applied normal and emergency measures in recovery, but this failed to respond. Well, the aircraft failed to respond to these emergency procedures. I advised the section leader that I was having trouble and that I was going to eject. And I did eject at 12,000 feet, and I knew that there was no chance of recovery.
So this time?
Well, it all started as a tour of what we had to do on the Friday afternoon it was, I think. It was practice air combat manoeuvres while I was still on the training course. I hadn't graduated at this stage. I was still learning to fly the Sabre and in its various forms. And on that particular day we were engaged to do a 4 versus 4 tactical manoeuvres. In other words, theoretically trying to shoot each other down out of the sky. And I was, being a student, I was on what we call a wingman. I was attached to another chap who was my lead, and he was part of the formation. And during the day, or that afternoon, we took off. It was a lovely day, if I recall, beautiful weather for flying. The radar people vectored us out, if I recall. They were up, that was further out to sea. But when the combat started, the two lots of 2 intercepting each other, it all went into a big melee, if I could call it that, where aeroplanes were sort of travelling very fast and re-manoeuvring and tried to do the right thing by what was on the course, and that was trying to get as much footage of an aerial shoot down of the opposition. So it was a rather complicated manoeuvre for an ab initio pilot like me, and it was also at high level. It was not low level, it was quite high. It was 30,000 feet plus, and at that height the aeroplanes are very sensitive to manoeuvres. They can stall fairly quickly up there if you're not careful. From what I recall, on that day, the manoeuvre that I got into with the chap leading me was a complicated one in the fact that we had to get very low speed. And the idea of getting low speed was to let the opposition fly past us so that we could then formate behind them and get an aerial shot. What's called a low-speed yo-yo, which was like a yo-yo is one of these things you can go either way. And during that manoeuvre, something happened to my aeroplane, which caused me to buffet and stall. And then the fun started, not fun, but the action started with me in an uncontrollable spin. The events that I recall was that it was a classic spin. although it was a very flat spin. It wasn't a vertical spin going down. It was a very flat saucer type spin, which I'd never encountered before in all my training on other types of aeroplanes. The sequence after that was that the aeroplane descended very rapidly, or quite rapidly, because I remember seeing the altimeter starting to wind down quite rapidly. There was a call on the radio. I'll never forget the call. They said, "Slats, if you can't control it by 10,000 feet, get out." And I did acknowledge that. And I also remember that it was written in our orders that if you're in an uncontrolled situation under 10,000 feet, you should eject from the aeroplane. So with that in mind, and the uncontrolled events that were unfolding in front of me, I was trying to do my best to try and get out of the spin, which I was finding very hard and very disorientating, of course. Other chaps on the radio was quite intense with people talking to. I can't recall the conversation, but they were giving ideas and orders. And at that stage, I virtually had to make my own decision about what I was going to do. When I did see the altimeter go through 10,000 feet, I did make a general radio call that I was going to eject, and I recall that I took the appropriate actions of starting the ejection sequence. From that moment on, I'd left the aeroplane. It was out of control, and fortunately, the ejection seat worked as advertised. With full credit to the guys that maintained the aeroplane, it was a perfect ejection as far as they were concerned, as far as I was concerned. I do remember going through the. I was unconscious a little bit while I went through the perspex. The ejection seat pushed me out of the aeroplane at such a rate of acceleration that I briefly blacked out, which we were told about. When I did come to, a few seconds later, I recall being pulled by the parachute, tumbling out of this ejection seat, and thereafter very quickly being pulled quite sharply by the canopy of the parachute, which had successfully opened. I had to get my bearings from there and trying to work out what my next manoeuvre was going to be as far as bringing the parachute down. At one stage I did try to find the aeroplane. I opened my legs, and to my absolute horror at the time, I saw this aeroplane heading towards the city of Newcastle, and it was the most frightening thing I think I've ever seen. Because at that stage I thought, well, it's going to be devastation wherever it hits. So you can imagine how I felt. And then I just tried to control the canopy the best I could, the parachute. It was rather exhausting towards the end because I was in the parachute for some time, some minutes. And I was pulling and tugging on various equipment cords, trying to manoeuvre myself, as we were taught in the training school, of trying to control the movement of a parachute to where you wanted to go. However, I didn't anticipate that the wind was so strong at about 2,000, 3,000 feet. The wind started to pick up from the sea. It was a sea breeze that came in. And at that stage I was quite exhausted trying to pull in. I just virtually gave up and just acknowledged that I was going to land somewhere in a populated area of Newcastle. My biggest worry was when I saw some church spires going past, and I thought, oh dear, to land on or near a church or top of a church would be perilous for any young aviator. Fortunately, I did land in Waratah. What I recall, I landed on the side of a road near a park. It seemed to be an undeveloped park at that stage, but it was near some high tension power lines. The parachute went over the top of the lines. I went underneath and rested against a pole. And from there, after I was a bit shaken, I tried to extricate myself from the equipment. Unfortunately, a couple of chaps who were working on in the area came along and helped me out, assisted me, and I was able to free myself, stand up, and take an evaluation of where I was. From what I recall, it wasn't too soon before I heard the police sirens, and the fire brigade came along, and they gave me a lot of assistance and comfort, help. I went to the hospital for observation. They took just x-rays, I recall, and just had a look at me and assessed me for being whether to be admitted as a patient or discharged. Fortunately, the doctor said I could go back to the base, so I think I was then airlifted back to the base by helicopter. Yeah, I was in shock. Yeah, I didn't know I was in shock, but I was in shock. But I did have a graze on my cut on my knee. And I think that was probably going through the canopy, the perspex, which was shattered. I might have just grazed my knee going through, or or when I hit the ground. I'm not sure, but that was very minor. I did ask them, people. I didn't know the full extent until I got back to base and saw my commanding officer and fellow pilots. The squadron doctor was there. The base doctor was there. In fact, he admitted me to the hospital on the base for observation, overnight observation, which I was very thankful for, because I didn't want to go back, talk to everybody at the bar, sort of thing. I was fairly stressed at that stage. Yeah. This was all part of the training, the final part of the training exercise. I was almost at the end of the training exercise, of the training course. As it turned out, I did graduate on the Sabre. I was very fortunate. I was very thankful for the Air Force letting me keep going as a fighter pilot. It's amazing. What I learned out of it is that you just get disorientated from where you are at the moment. You can, when you're in a fight, a dog fight, and you're going, the horizon's changing so much, and geographically, you really don't know where you are sometimes. You think you are over a certain spot, but you're not sure. And you can get distracted by some kilometres from where you think you are. And in this case, it's what happened. I think in the excitement of the day, there was a lot of manoeuvres going on. A lot of high-speed manoeuvres going on, and the upper wind just took us over the city of Newcastle, as it turned out, for this dramatic event to happen. Yeah. I found out, the other day I rang a friend of mine, because I knew I was coming up to have the interview. And I said, did you know anybody who did an analysis, a flight analysis back in 1963 after my ejection, and it's the Air Force have got a unit called the Aircraft Research and Development Unit, ARDU it's called, and they do a lot of tests. They have test pilots, and they do a lot of testing on aeroplanes. And one of the things they had to do, and this was ordered by a higher level, as part of my investigation on what happened, was to go in and try and simulate a Sabre doing exactly what happened to me. And do you think they could do that? They had their best pilots in the Air Force down at Laverton in Victoria at the time, at the Aircraft Research and Development Unit with a Sabre, with the equipment I had on board, everything there. And I spoke to someone the other day, and he rolled his eyes and he said, that's a long time ago, but we did so many tests. It could have been dozens of tests spinning tests in the aeroplane, but they could not get into the manoeuvre that I was in, which was a very flat spin vertical spin going down. So they never came up with a conclusion. They did say, the report did say it was pilot error of skill, which I did acknowledge. I mean, they had to have a reason for the ejection, and it was just an error of skill because it was a pupil trying to learn about the aeroplane and what its capabilities were. So I did a written report, and it was submitted into the Court of Inquiry. There was a Court of Inquiry convened, and they did a very thorough job, as all the Courts of Inquiries do for aircraft accidents. And their evaluation, I think, is down in Canberra somewhere in the archives. But my report is, I've got a report there that I submitted to the Air Force, and my official report of what happened. One of the things I was meant to tell you about when I was descending in my parachute, a bit frightening at times to see my mates, my friends, fly past in the other Sabres, waving to me and seeing if I was okay in the descent. And it's the first time I've been in the air, dangling in the air with an aeroplane, a high-speed aeroplane, flashing past me, and I'm trying to wave to them at the same time, to telling them I'm all right, still alive. That's another one of that other aeroplane. It was the other house was damaged too. I don't know. One of the houses was damaged as well. And this is the photo of the street. You can see the damage there. Mrs. Tilitsky, she was out the front. So if she'd been sitting at the back, you can imagine, she wouldn't be here today or back then.
But I can see what you mean, of like the block.
Yeah.
It only really shows that one house.
One house, yeah.
It's sort of like what you described.
It just fell out of the sky. Fell out of the sky. Yeah. It didn't crash. It didn't crash into the house. It fell on the house, which is most unusual.
Mrs. Agar, I believe you live near, close to this house.
Yes, 2 doors away.
And what do you know about it?
Well, I was round at my brother's place in Cadell Avenue when I heard the explosion. I saw the smoke, I thought it was my place, and I got almost to it. And then I found it was Mr. Tilitsky's place.
And Mr. and Mrs. Tilitsky, I believe Mrs. Tilitsky was in the house when it actually hit.
Mrs. Tilitsky is a widow.
I see.
And she was in the house, I believe, when it hit.
And she walked out towards the front door?
She kept walking to the front and got out
just after it exploded?
Yes.
I see. And it's a bit of a mess around here, isn't it?
Oh, it's dreadful.
Could have been anybody's house nearby.
Yes, and if this had been a weatherboard house, all our homes would have gone.
Mrs. Bell, I believe you live even closer than Mrs. Agar. You're next door.
Maybe up.
And what was the first you knew of this?
Oh, a terrific explosion. Everything just shook and jumped and didn't know what happened. And it's an awful thing.
But did you come out and have a look, or did you run out in the street?
No, come out and had a look.
And what did you see?
The clothesline ablaze and everything else at the back of it was all alight.
And the plane was,
Right,
the plane had exploded?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas, I believe you were pretty close to the thing, right opposite, in fact. What happened?
Oh, I heard the plane first. It sounded to be too low. And then I heard the bang, and I wasn't sure where it was because, it sounds all around.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to grab the hose.
Garden hose, was it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then I saw where it was and I rang the fire brigade.
Mm. You could see the smoke and flames?
See the smoke.
Mm.
And rang the fire brigade, then I grabbed the hose and brought it into Mrs. Tilitsky's house here. And I tried to put out what fire he could. I couldn't see Mrs. Tilitsky anywhere, but I heard that she was out all right. We tried to get out the things, that we could save. And then the fire brigade come after a while. It wasn't very long. And
you actually went into the house, although the front had been blown out of it?
Well, the front wasn't blown out, the back was blown out.
Back blown out, the front door was blown out, I believe.
Yeah.
Mm. That's when Mrs. Tilitsky came out.
Yeah,
Mm.
she was very lucky. I've got a lot to be thankful for.
Could
That
have
you
been
got out all
anybody's
right.
house around here then.
Yeah, it could have been anyway.
The other thing is the ejection seat, which was quite a big piece of equipment that was ejected, with me in it. That landed, I believe, very close to the Waratah railway station. In fact, it was very close to the signal box. So those guys operating the equipment in those in the signals had a close call, because if that ejection seat had gone through into their work environment, it would have been quite a disastrous outcome, I should imagine. That's the aeroplane, the Sabre, and this is probably what we had on board. We had the missile. At the time we had these on for training. See, these are air-to-air for air-to-air combat manoeuvres. So, but that was me taken either before the accident or after the accident, I don't know. Yeah. Well, my career lasted for nearly 9 years in the Air Force, and then I left that for a civilian job. Yeah, but it was a full-on 9 years of flying, mainly in Butterworth, Singapore, Labuan in Borneo, and of course in Vietnam. Vietnam was probably the highlight of all my flying. Yeah. There's Sunnyside Street. So that was probably that's the aeroplane landed there. The train station is here. I don't know where the signal box, but the ejection seat would have landed somewhere there.
Yeah.
And I landed down further on this street here.
Oh, I see where the red icon is.
Yeah, that's a train station there.
Yeah.
That's where I landed there.
Yes, yeah.
And Mrs. Tilitsky's house would have been up here somewhere,
Yeah.
Mayfield.
And so she lived in Sunnyside
Sunnyside, yeah. And this is Crescent Road where I landed.
Yeah, I see.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got very good support from my colleagues, the Air Force. My commanding officer was very supportive. But I think the big test came for me, and it was a question that my commanding officer, it was the OC of the base, the commanding officer of the base. He said, "Ron, we've got an aeroplane out there today." This was the day after the accident. This is the following day. He said, "Ron, we've got another aeroplane out, an F-86. We would like you to go and fly it. Would you be able to go and fly that for an hour and do what you like and just get airborne, and are you prepared to fly the aeroplane again?" And that was the biggest decision of my life, because I said, "Yes, sir, I will." And I went out there and got strapped up, and off I went, and I had an hour to myself in the air at the taxpayer's expense, and I flew around in a Sabre all by myself out over the ocean, mainly well clear of Newcastle, but to get my confidence back. And I really enjoyed that vote of confidence in me, and I came back and I was elated that I could keep flying, and it was good. It was good to do that.